What if the most important technology question of our time is not technical at all? Not how fast AI will improve, not when machines will surpass human skill, not even whether the next wave of intelligence will transform civilization, but this: what kind of humanity will be doing the building? Because every tool, no matter how advanced, eventually becomes a mirror. It reflects the values of the hands that shape it. And now, in the age of artificial intelligence, that mirror is getting larger, brighter, and harder to ignore. We are living through a strange paradox. Never before have we had such extraordinary power to compute, predict, optimize, and automate. And yet, in the middle of all this acceleration, many people feel a deep uncertainty. We are more connected, but not always more grounded. More capable, but not always more wise. More informed, but not always more humane. So, perhaps the challenge before us is not simply to invent the future. Perhaps it is to remember what the future is for. That to me is the doorway into this conversation. The source text of Garden of Wisdom begins with a deeply personal insight that our environment does not merely surround us, it shapes us. The air we breathe, the landscapes we inhabit, the stories we inherit, the relationships we build, the culture we absorb, all of these become part of who we are. We do not stand outside the garden of life, we grow inside it. And because of that, we are not only users of the world, we are its gardeners and guardians. Now pause for a moment and consider what that means in technological terms. If our tools shape the environment, and the environment shapes the human being, then technology is never neutral. It is ecological. It enters the soil of culture. It changes how attention flows, how power is distributed, how children imagine the future, how communities trust, how truth is recognized, how life is valued. So the question is not merely what can AI do? The deeper question is what kind of world will AI teach us to live inside? That is why this conversation matters. The book's opening chapters argue that ancient wisdom still has something essential to say to a civilization building intelligent machines. Not because ancient text contains software code, not because scripture can replace science, but because old stories often ask the oldest and most necessary questions. What is power for? What are human beings responsible for? What must never be sacrificed in the name of progress? How do we create without forgetting humility? And this is where the talk becomes interesting, because we are often told that modernity and spirituality live on opposite sides of a divide. One is rational, the other reflective. One builds, the other contemplates. One looks forward, the other backward. But what if that opposition is false? What if the future's most urgent task is synthesis? What if the next step in civilization is not choosing between innovation and wisdom, but finally bringing them into the same room? That is the central motif I want to leave with you today. Power needs a compass, not less power, a better compass. The book expresses this through a simple formula: timeless wisdom plus modern technology equals an ethical AI era. I will translate that into spoken language this way: intelligence becomes dangerous when it outgrows character. Progress becomes worthy when it is guided by conscience. Think about the biblical image of the garden. Whatever one's religious background, it remains one of humanity's great civilizational metaphors. A garden is not a wilderness left untouched, and it is not a factory optimized for extraction. A garden is a living system. It requires attention, restraint, reciprocity, and care. It flourishes not through domination, but through relationship. That is a powerful image for our technological moment, because AI is not arriving in an empty world. It is entering a living garden ecosystems, institutions, cultures, moral traditions, historical wounds, economic inequalities, communities of hope, and communities of fear. If we introduce powerful systems into that garden carelessly, we do not merely add efficiency, we alter the conditions of life. And that means ethics cannot be an afterthought. It cannot be a compliance memo stapled onto innovation at the end. Ethics must be upstream. It must be architectural. It must be part of the design logic from the beginning. Let me put it plainly. If we teach machines to optimize, but we do not teach societies what is worth optimizing for, then we are not building intelligence. We are scaling confusion. If we accelerate capability without enlarging responsibility, we are not progressing. We are amplifying risk. And if we create systems that are brilliant in computation but empty of moral direction, then the real failure will not belong to the machine. It will belong to us. Now, one of the strongest ideas in these opening sections is that ecology offers a way to think about ethics. As an ecology sees it, life is relational. Nothing exists in isolation. Every organism participates in a web of exchange. Energy, information, vulnerability, adaptation, cooperation, competition. Systems survive not only through strength, but through balance. Resilience comes from interdependence. That ecological lens matters enormously for AI because digital systems now shape material systems. Algorithms influence energy use, supply chains, medical decisions, hiring patterns, education, surveillance, finance, even warfare. The technological is no longer separate from the biological, the social, or the political, it is entangled with them. So when we ask whether AI is good or bad, that is too simple. A better question is, does this system deepen the health of the whole? Does it strengthen trust? Does it protect dignity? Does it widen justice? Does it regenerate the conditions for life? Does it help human beings become more fully human? Those are ecological questions. They are also ethical questions. And maybe at the deepest level, they are spiritual questions. Because spirituality, at least in the broad sense used in the book, is about the values and meanings by which people live. It is about what we hold sacred. It is about what we refuse to reduce to utility. It is about whether reality is merely a field of resources or also a field of responsibility. So let me ask you directly, what in our age of intelligent machines are we still willing to call sacred? Human attention, human dignity, the living earth, truth, compassion, future generations? If we cannot answer that question, then no amount of technical sophistication will save us from moral drift. Another idea in the book's opening is especially powerful, that we are at a crossroads. The language is vivid. Humanity is described as standing on the edge of transformation, not only technological but civilization. That feels right to me. We are not simply adopting new tools, we are renegotiating what it means to know, to create, to decide, to relate, perhaps even what it means to be human. And crossroads are dangerous places. At a crossroads, one path leads to domination masquerading as progress. A world where intelligence is centralized, surveillance normalized, inequality automated, and human depth flattened into data. A world of immense capability and shrinking wisdom. But another path is still possible. A path where intelligence is aligned with stewardship, where design respects planetary boundaries, where technology supports human flourishing instead of replacing it, where innovation is judged not only by what it can do, but by what it cultivates in society. That path requires more than invention. it requires interpretation. And this is where the book makes a bold move. It returns to old stories, not as relics, but as frameworks for moral imagination. Stories of creation, stewardship, temptation, exile, responsibility, justice, compassion. These stories endure because they dramatize recurring human problems. They remind us that whenever human beings gain power, they also face temptation. Whenever we become makers, we must ask what kind of creation we are making. Whenever we reach for knowledge, we must ask whether wisdom is keeping pace. That is not anti-technology, that is mature technology. In fact, one of the most compelling claims in the opening chapters is that the real aim is not simply smarter machines, but a more humane society. I think that distinction is everything. The point of AI should not be to produce maximum automation at minimum moral cost. The point should be to help build a civilization that is more just, more reflective, more compassionate, more capable of sustaining life. Notice the shift from efficiency to meaning, from power to purpose, from extraction to stewardship, from intelligence alone to intelligence with conscience. That is the thesis. And the book gives it another memorable formula: love plus light equals life. However poetic that may sound on the page, it translates into a serious public principle. Light is knowledge, discovery, technical capacity. Love is ethical direction, compassion, responsibility, care. Put them together, and progress becomes life giving. Separate them, and power becomes cold. Let that sit for a moment, because our age has produced an astonishing amount of light. But has it produced enough love to guide that light? Enough patience to govern it? Enough humility to question it? Enough moral courage to slow it when slowing is necessary? Enough imagination to direct it toward the common good? These are not sentimental questions, they are structural questions. Civilizations rise or fall on how they answer them. The opening chapters also emphasize that cultures across the world offer resources for this ethical work: stewardship, justice, harmony, nonviolence, communal responsibility, respect for life. In other words, no single tradition owns wisdom. A wiser future will likely be built through dialogue between science and ethics, between innovation and restraint, between local cultures and global responsibilities, between inherited teachings and emerging realities. That matters because AI is global, but moral life is lived locally. People encounter technology not as an abstraction, but in hospitals, classrooms, borders, neighborhoods, courts, farms, homes. If we want ethical AI, then ethics must be lived, translated, contested, and embodied in real institutions. So here's another question for all of us. When future generations look back at this moment, what will they say we were building? A market, a machine, an empire of optimization, or a civilization with a conscience? Because those are not the same project. And now we come to perhaps the deepest insight of all. The book suggests that AI is, in some sense, an extension of consciousness, an extension of who we are, of our stories, our values, our moral compass. I think that is profoundly important. It means that the AI question is never only about AI. It is about us, what we fear, what we worship, what we reward, what we neglect, what we imagine human beings to be for. Machines may become more powerful, but they will still be shaped by human aims. And so the first task is not merely to train the model, it is to train the civilization, to cultivate discernment, to recover moral vocabulary, to widen the circle of concern, to remember that technological maturity without ethical maturity is a contradiction. We are, after all, still choosing what kind of gardeners we will be. Will we plant systems that exhaust the soil of trust? Will we cultivate tools that reward domination? Will we build a future that dazzles the eye but starves the soul? Or will we learn, finally, that the highest form of intelligence is not control but care? That may be the great lesson hiding in plain sight. Not that we should fear the future, not that we should romanticize the past, but that we should build with memory, with humility, with courage, with ecological intelligence, with spiritual seriousness, with a public ethic worthy of the power now in our hands. Power needs a compass, and if we can hold on to that truth, then perhaps AI will not become a monument to human overreach. Perhaps it can become an instrument of wiser stewardship. Perhaps it can help us repair systems rather than merely accelerate them. Perhaps it can widen human possibility without hollowing out human meaning. That is the hope inside this first movement of Garden of Wisdom, that the future does not have to choose between intelligence and soul. It can choose both, but only if we do. The future will not be saved by intelligence alone. It will be shaped by whether we have the wisdom to guide power with a compass